Imagine a man kneeling beside his bed before the day has properly begun. His words are earnest. He prays for his mother, whose illness has made her dependent upon him. He asks that her faith may be strengthened, that her fears may be calmed, and that her soul may be drawn nearer to God. For several minutes he feels the solemnity of what he is doing. Then he rises, enters the kitchen, and hears her ask whether he might bring her medicine. He sighs. Must it always be now? He replies. The prayer was tender, the answer was cruel, and between the two there were scarcely 30 seconds. This scene presents us with a disturbing question. What if a person can pray more intensely while becoming less patient, less truthful, and less willing to love? What if prayer, which ought to open the heart to God, becomes a curtain behind which the unchanged heart may hide? This is not an argument against prayer, nor against emotion in prayer. Still less is it an attempt to make spiritual warfare into a gloomy obsession. Prayer is not the disease in this picture. It is the medicine. But even medicine can be admired on the shelf while the wound remains untreated. A person may speak beautifully of mercy while refusing the smallest inconvenience mercy requires. Lewis suggests that temptation does not always attack a good practice from the front. Sometimes it approaches from the side and whispers, "Continue by all means, but continue in such a manner that nothing comes of it." The tempter need not persuade the man to abandon prayer if he can keep that prayer lofty, flattering, and safely separated from conduct. Let him grieve over his mother's spiritual condition, provided he never notices her aching body. Let him ask God to correct her faults, provided he never sees his own impatience. Let him feel devout, provided devotion never alters his tone of voice. This idea invites us to judge prayer neither by its length nor by the warmth it produces, but by its fruits. Does it make us more honest, more attentive, more ready to apologize, to serve, and to surrender our cherished version of events? Genuine prayer does not carry us away from reality. It returns us to reality with clearer sight. The gravest danger, then, may not be prayerlessness. It may be prayer used as evidence that the heart need not change. To understand how something so holy can become so evasive, we must now turn to Lewis's peculiar method, allowing the enemy himself to explain what makes religious behavior useful to temptation. In the Screwtape Letters, everything is viewed through a reversed mirror. What heaven calls repentance, Screwtape calls a disaster. What a Christian may celebrate as spiritual progress, the tempter examines for some hidden opportunity. Has the man begun to pray? Very well. Can he be made proud of his prayers? Has he entered a church? Excellent. Can he now despise the ordinary people in the next pew? This inverted perspective exposes a difficult truth. A religious practice is not necessarily bearing good fruit merely because it looks religious. Prayer may be counted a success by the worshipper and a success by the tempter, but for entirely different reasons. The worshipper sees devotion, the tempter sees vanity. The worshipper sees concern for another person, the tempter sees concealed resentment. The worshipper sees an hour given to God, the tempter sees an hour spent avoiding the duty God has already placed before him. Lewis suggests that spiritual conflict usually enters through such ordinary doors. We expect evil to announce itself with violence, terror, or some unmistakable rejection of God. Yet the more common battlefield may be a withheld kindness, a sharp reply, an unexamined motive, or an apology postponed until tomorrow. None of these appears spectacular. That is precisely their advantage. One impatient answer may seem like a pebble, but pebbles accumulate. Choice by choice, the heart is trained in a direction. Each small refusal of love makes the next refusal easier, until what began as an exception becomes a habit, and what became a habit begins to feel like personality. The road away from God need not descend suddenly over a cliff. It may slope so gently that the traveler congratulates himself on standing still. Here we must preserve proportion. One mistake is to become fascinated with evil, imagining a demon behind every headache, interruption, or misplaced key. The opposite mistake is to suppose that temptation cannot work through habits, emotions, wounded pride, or ordinary psychology. Lewis invites us between these errors. He makes the devil's ridiculous because evil must be resisted, not admired. Once the scheme is recognized, we need not stare at it for hours. We may laugh at its pretension, ask for God's help, and perform the neglected duty. The tempter's ideal achievement, then, is not always to make a person openly godless. It may be enough to keep him devout enough to feel secure, yet abstract enough to remain unchanged. Prayer is therefore a contested act, tested not merely by eloquence, duration, or intensity, but by the direction in which it carries the soul. And the first evidence appears not in a theological argument, but in the room next door, where an imagined loved one is much easier to cherish than the real one. Consider again the man and his ailing mother. The woman in his prayer is patient, receptive, and almost luminous beneath the soft light of his concern. She is a soul in need of grace, and he feels noble for desiring her good. But the woman in the kitchen has aching joints, repeats herself, interrupts his plans, and uses a particular tone that has irritated him for years. These two women occupy the same chair, yet in his mind they have become entirely different people. Lewis suggests that we often pray for an imagined person while living with a real one. The imagined person is wonderfully manageable. She has no inconvenient body, no troublesome habits, no history of misunderstood remarks. She exists chiefly as the object of our spiritual concern. The real person, however, needs medicine, company, patience, and perhaps the sacrifice of an hour we had reserved for ourselves. This contrast highlights one of the most respectable forms of self-deception. We may become deeply concerned about another person's pride, bitterness, faith, or moral weakness, while remaining strangely indifferent to that person's exhaustion, loneliness, or physical pain. We ask God to transform the soul while ignoring the burden sitting beside us at the table. Intimacy makes this danger sharper because families develop private dictionaries of offense. We judge our own sharp words by what we intended. I was only reminding her. Yet we judge her words by the most insulting meaning they could possibly contain. She said that because she does not respect me. Our intention becomes the defense attorney for ourselves and the prosecutor of everyone else. Then the cycle begins. Expecting irritation, we enter the room with a hardened voice. The other person hears the hardness and becomes defensive. Her defensiveness confirms our suspicion that she is unreasonable, and we return to prayer with fresh evidence against her. Thus we may ask God to heal a conflict we continue manufacturing. This is the point at which concern becomes control. We repeatedly ask God to correct the other person, but never ask, "What does love require from me?" before noon. Perhaps it requires preparing food without announcing the sacrifice. Perhaps it means listening without turning every sentence into a correction. Perhaps it asks us to soften our tone, admit that pain affects behavior, or apologize without adding an explanation that cancels the apology. The desire to rescue a soul can feel heroic. Bringing a glass of water does not. Yet love is usually disclosed in these short distances. From the bedroom to the kitchen, from conviction to apology, from compassion felt to compassion embodied. Ask yourself whether the person in your prayers receives the kindness of the person in your presence. If compassion never crosses the table, prayer has become an alibi. But imagination can replace more than our neighbor. It can also construct a manageable version of God and mistake concentration upon that construction for communion with the living God. When we close our eyes to pray, the mind rarely becomes empty. It begins furnishing the room. From remembered paintings, childhood sermons, familiar phrases, moments of comfort, and private hopes, we assemble an inward picture of God. One person imagines a kindly father. Another senses a distant judge. Another reaches for the warmth once felt in worship. Without noticing it, each may begin speaking not to God as he is, but to a portrait assembled from memory and desire. Lewis suggests that the danger lies not in having images or using words. Human beings must think through language, symbol, memory, and imagination. A window is not an enemy merely because it stands between the eye and the landscape. Its purpose is to let us see beyond it. But if we spend the whole morning polishing the glass, admiring its color, and judging whether the light upon it feels sufficiently beautiful, we may forget that the window was meant to open our vision onto something real. So it is with prayerful language. The words Father, Shepherd, and King can direct the heart toward God. Yet they become evasive when we treat the vividness of our thoughts as though it were the measure of His presence. A clear image is not necessarily communion, and a dim image is not necessarily abandonment. Feelings are changeable, but God is not remade each morning by the weather within us. The God we assemble is usually suspiciously agreeable. He approves the plans we already prefer, confirms the opinions we already hold, dislikes precisely the people who irritate us, and asks only for sacrifices we secretly wish to make. He resembles less the Creator before whom every heart is uncovered, and more a spiritual reflection in a flattering mirror. The living God is not so manageable. He knows the worshipper more completely than the worshipper knows himself. He sees beneath noble vocabulary to concealed resentment, beneath confident doctrine to fear, beneath apparent surrender to the hand still gripping control. To meet Him is therefore comforting, but it is not always comfortable. Divine love consoles us, yet it also contradicts us. It forgives, yet it calls us out of hiding. Genuine prayer includes surrendering our claim to define God according to our mood, our political loyalties, our aesthetic preferences, or the private outcome we urgently desire. It asks not merely, will you bless what I have chosen, but, will you correct what I have mistaken? When you pray, do not exhaust yourself trying to produce a perfect picture of God. Instead, offer Him the imperfect picture itself. Admit its limits. Let your words become a window rather than a wall. The decisive movement is from the God I think you are toward the God you know yourself to be. Faith does not require flawless imagination. It requires truthful openness to the one no imagination can contain. Yet once the mind begins inspecting its picture of God, it can turn inward one step further until the worshipper's own spiritual performance becomes the real object of attention. A person begins to pray and almost immediately becomes his own observer. Am I sufficiently reverent? Am I feeling the proper sorrow? Have I surrendered completely? Was that last thought humble, or was I secretly proud of it? Before long, prayer resembles a stage upon which the actor is also critic, audience, and anxious reviewer. Lewis suggests that attention can turn inward by almost invisible degrees. At first, we attend to God. Then, we begin attending to the quality of our attention to God. Repentance becomes concern about whether we appear repentant, even to ourselves. Love becomes admiration of ourselves as loving. The telescope designed to reveal the heavens has been turned around, and now it shows nothing but the eye looking through it. This is why self-conscious virtue is so comical and so dangerous. The moment a person notices his humility as though it were a medal pinned to his coat, pride has already found new material. He may even become proud of detecting the pride within his humility. Then, discovering this second pride, he congratulates himself on being unusually honest about it. The tempter could scarcely ask for a more efficient machine. Every attempt to escape the self becomes another journey around it. Yet there is an opposite form of the same captivity. Some people do not admire their spiritual performance. They endlessly condemn it. They examine every distraction, emotion, and imperfect motive until prayer becomes an inquest with no verdict and no adjournment. God fades from view, the neighbor waiting for kindness fades from view, the duty requiring action fades from view. Only the condition of the soul remains, enlarged, until it fills the universe. Honest self-examination is necessary, but it has a destination. It identifies what must be confessed, repaired, abandoned, or begun. Spiritual self-absorption merely circles the wound. One says, I spoke cruelly, forgive me, and help me apologize. The other asks for the 100th time whether its remorse feels sufficiently authentic. Here Lewis's remedy is wonderfully plain: recover humor and proportion. Recognize the absurdity of trying to award marks for your own devotion. Confess what is clear, entrust what is obscure to God, and return to the next faithful action. The final judgment of your soul does not belong to you. God sees more truly than either vanity or guilt can see. This perspective also transforms spiritual dryness. The absence of warmth does not make an honest prayer worthless, just as tears and intensity do not make an evasive prayer faithful. Feelings may accompany communion, but they are not its certificate. You are not required to manufacture an impressive inner weather. You are invited to speak truthfully, receive mercy, and obey. But the desire for a particular feeling is only one form of control. Another appears when we decide that prayer has succeeded only if circumstances follow the script we secretly placed in God's hands. A person asks sincerely for healing, guidance, reconciliation, or relief. Then he waits. At first, the waiting is hopeful. As days become weeks, hope grows anxious. No answer arrives in the form he can recognize, no door opens at the expected hour, and no inward peace descends. Eventually he concludes that prayer has failed, or that God has withdrawn. Disappointment is not itself a failure of faith. Scripture does not require us to disguise grief with cheerful language. Pain may be spoken plainly, questions may be brought into prayer, and tears need no apology. Yet disappointment can reveal something hidden. Beneath the request, there may have been a bargain. The bargain says, "I will trust you, provided relief arrives by this date," or "I will follow you, provided guidance removes uncertainty." It may insist that reconciliation occur in the precise form we imagined, that the person we love must change, or that prayer must immediately produce calm. We asked for God's help, but quietly reserved the right to decide what that help must look like. Lewis's insight encourages an uncomfortable question. Did we desire God, or chiefly the assurance, control, and preferred outcome we expected prayer to provide? This does not make the original request insincere. Human motives are rarely pure or simple. It means only that unanswered prayer may expose the hand, still gripping the steering wheel, while the lips speak of surrender. Trust does not mean pretending that pain is unreal, nor does it mean passively waiting while responsibilities are neglected. If someone is ill, trust may seek medical help. If a relationship is wounded, trust may tell the truth, ask forgiveness, establish a wise boundary, or invite counsel. If danger approaches, trust may prepare carefully. Faithfulness is not inactivity. Surrender and fatalism are opposites. Fatalism says, "Nothing I do matters." Surrender says, "My actions matter, but I am not sovereign over every consequence." It acts with courage while releasing the fantasy of control. It obeys without demanding the entire explanation in advance. So when the desired answer has not come, ask a deeper question. Can I remain truthful without becoming bitter? Can I continue loving when love has not produced the result I wanted? Can I perform today's duty without possessing tomorrow's guarantee? Disappointment, then, need not become evidence that prayer is empty. It can become a doorway through which control is exposed, sorrow is honestly offered, and trust grows deeper roots. But such surrender requires sustained attention, and modern life offers a remarkably efficient way to avoid both God and reality while preserving the sensation of spiritual engagement. The screen offers a remarkable promise. Everyone is near, everything is available, and no moment need ever be empty. Yet while it gives us access to distant voices, it repeatedly removes us from the person across the table, the place beneath our feet, and the duty waiting within reach. It promises connection, but often trains us in absence. Lewis wrote before the smartphone, but his understanding of distraction makes its spiritual danger easy to recognize. A mind carried from alert to image, from argument to entertainment, from outrage to novelty, does not merely lose time. It acquires a habit of fragmentation. Silence begins to feel barren. A paragraph seems too long. Another person's unhurried speech becomes difficult to bear. Even prayer is approached with the restless expectation that something new must happen every few seconds. This habit can disguise itself as spiritual hunger. A person listens to sermons, watches devotional clips, saves inspiring phrases, follows religious debates, and learns the vocabulary of faith. Yet he seldom becomes still enough to tell God the truth. He has accumulated information about prayer while avoiding prayer itself. Knowing about someone is not the same as sharing a room with him. We may know a friend's latest photographs, opinions, travels, and meals while no longer knowing the expression on his face when he is afraid. In the same way, consuming religious material is not identical to communion with God. One may stimulate thought, stir emotion, and even offer genuine instruction. The other requires presence, honesty, patience, and surrender. The perpetual presence of the screen also weakens the roots that help sustain an integrated spiritual life. Attention to a particular place, participation in a real community, memory of inherited wisdom, and practices repeated whether or not they feel exciting. Instead of inhabiting one life, we hover over thousands of fragments. Technology is not a magical evil, nor is every use of it an act of escape. The question is what our repeated choices are making of us. Commercial systems compete for attention, but we still form habits by what we permit, pursue, and practice. Attention is like water in a garden. Wherever it is continually directed, something grows. Try then a modest experiment. Protect 15 minutes. Place the device beyond reach. Do not demand a spiritual experience. Sit before God without a stream of borrowed voices. Notice what returns when the noise stops. Perhaps fear, resentment, grief, or a duty you have postponed. Bring that reality into prayer. Some of what we call spiritual hunger may be hunger continually fed with substitutes, enough stimulation to keep the mind occupied, but not enough presence to nourish the soul. And when distraction finally falls silent, prayer does not carry us away from ordinary life. It returns us to the body, the household, the apology, and the next necessary act. Return once more to the man beside his bed. This time, he does not rehearse his mother's faults before God. He remembers her pain. He admits his resentment, asks for mercy, and rises without demanding that the prayer make him feel noble. When she calls from the kitchen, the circumstances have not changed. Her voice still carries the familiar tone, but he answers differently. This is prayer returning with hands and feet. Reality-bound prayer has 4 movements. First, it attends to what is actually present. It sees not merely a difficult relative, but an aging body, an anxious mind, an unfinished task, and a person whose dignity is not erased by inconvenience. Attention is the first gift of love, because we cannot faithfully serve what we refuse to see. Second, it speaks truthfully. The worshipper does not hide resentment beneath spiritual language or rename the desire for control as concern. He may say, "I am tired. I want her to change because then my life would be easier. I do not possess the patience I pretend to possess." Such honesty is not irreverence. God already knows the hidden motive. Confession simply opens the locked room to his light. Third, prayer receives limits. You may not be able to cure the illness, repair the marriage, convince the stubborn friend, or carry every burden. Humility does not mean doing nothing. It means refusing to play God while offering the strength, time, wisdom, and resources you have actually been given. Fourth, prayer obeys the next clear demand of love. Bring the medicine, prepare the meal, make the difficult call. Listen without quietly composing a correction. Challenge what is false when truth requires courage. Seek qualified help when the need exceeds your ability. Sometimes love speaks. Sometimes it organizes practical assistance. Sometimes it remains quietly beside a sufferer for whom no clever sentence will do. Lewis's emphasis on ordinary choices reminds us that repentance must travel outward. Confession that never produces an apology, restitution, a changed habit, or a repaired boundary remains incomplete in practice. Breath becomes speech, and speech becomes movement. What we say before God begins to alter our next sentence, our posture at the table, our use of money, and the hours we once guarded for ourselves. These actions appear small because obedience is usually local. Character is formed less often in heroic moments than in accumulated answers to daily demands. The glass of water matters precisely because no one will write a biography about it. Yet service must not become another instrument of control. Loving action cannot guarantee gratitude, agreement, conversion, or recovery. We may act kindly and still be misunderstood. We may apologize and receive no apology in return. Prayer teaches us to offer love without claiming ownership of its results. In this way, embodied prayer restores what distraction and self-absorption divide. It reunites us with people, place, inherited wisdom, responsibility, and dependence upon God. Action does not replace prayer. It reveals prayer's truth. And prayer does not make action unnecessary. It keeps service from becoming a performance of our own goodness. Prayer is therefore neither an escape nor a technique. It is communion that makes us more present to God, to our neighbor, to suffering, and to duty. But because self-deception is subtle, good intentions are not enough. We need practical questions that can test the fruits of prayer without turning the test into yet another performance. Because the heart is skilled at disguising escape as devotion, it helps to ask not whether a prayer felt impressive, but what kind of person it is forming. These 7 questions are not a tribunal. They are windows through which light may enter. First, the question of truth. After praying, am I more willing to name my real motive, fault, fear, or desire? Can I say, I am jealous, rather than, I am burdened by his pride? Can I admit, I want control, rather than decorating that desire as spiritual concern? Truthful prayer removes disguises because God cannot heal the person we pretend to be. Second, the question of attention. Has prayer made the actual person before me more visible? Do I notice the aching body, the weary face, the loneliness, and the inconvenient circumstances I preferred to overlook? Prayer that enlarges an imaginary concern while shrinking a real neighbor has lost its direction. Third, the question of humility. Whose faults occupy most of my vision? If I leave prayer with a detailed catalogue of another person's defects, but no awareness of my impatience, pride, or desire to control, I may have used God's presence as a courtroom in which I appointed myself prosecutor. Fourth, the question of freedom. Can I release the feeling, timetable, image, or outcome I wanted? Can I remain faithful when peace does not arrive immediately, when guidance leaves uncertainty, or when healing takes a form I did not choose? God's silence is not proved by the absence of my preferred answer. Fifth, the question of obedience. What specific action follows? Is there an apology to make, a boundary to establish, an errand to complete, a debt to repair, a device to silence, or a request for help I have avoided? Genuine prayer may concern eternity, but it usually sends us towards something close enough to do today. Sixth, the question of love. Has my manner changed where no audience will applaud? Consider the tone of your voice, the patience with which you listen, the impulse to interrupt, and the willingness to forgive. Love is often tested not in grand declarations, but in the ordinary grammar of daily life. Seventh, the question of proportion. Can I confess failure, receive mercy, laugh at my pretensions, and continue with the next duty? Or must my spiritual condition become the center of the universe? Humility does not require endless self-condemnation. Sometimes wisdom means admitting the fault, accepting grace, and going to bed. Do not turn these questions into a ledger by which you prove your righteousness. Use them as windows, not scales. A simple rhythm is enough. Pray plainly, remain silent, identify one fact you have avoided, choose one act of obedience, and release the result to God. This test leads away from vague intensity and toward truth, attention, humility, surrender, and love. And in the final movement, these qualities gather into one image. Prayer is not a hiding place from reality. but the door through which we are sent back into it renewed. The person at the table is no longer merely a figure in an illustration. That person already has a name. It may be your parent, your spouse, your child, your colleague, or the stranger whose need interrupts the private plan you had made for the day. The question is not whether this person is easy to love. The question is whether prayer helps you meet that person without disguise. Genuine prayer does not flatter our preferred image of God, nor does it preserve our preferred image of ourselves. It permits God to correct our sight and redirect our will. It carries us from the imagined neighbor to the embodied one, from the deity assembled out of private preferences to the living God, from manufactured feelings to quiet faithfulness, from controlled outcomes to surrendered obedience, and from endless stimulation to the difficult gift of presence. None of us escapes self-deception perfectly. We can become proud of discovering our pride and anxious about whether we are sufficiently free from anxiety. The answer is not to place the soul beneath a microscope and spend every hour inspecting it. The answer is repeated return. Confess what is true, accept mercy, recover a sense of humor, and perform the next small act of love. So begin now with something plain. Silence the device. Name one person whom you have treated more kindly in prayer than in life. Ask God for help without using the prayer to prosecute that person. Then choose one concrete response. Bring what is needed. Listen without correcting. Make the call. Keep the promise. Offer the apology without hiding a defense inside it. Do not despise the smallness of such actions. A heart may drift from love through 1,000 minor refusals, but it may also be trained toward love through 1,000 acts of ordinary faithfulness. The impatient answer matters. So does the gentler one. The neglected duty forms us, and so does the duty performed when no one is watching. The prayer now concludes. The room has not changed. The illness remains. The relationship is still complicated. The difficult person may still be difficult, and no sudden spiritual feeling has descended to make obedience effortless. But the worshipper rises without disguise. He no longer asks prayer to shelter him from reality. He asks it to prepare him for reality. He relinquishes the fantasy of control, opens the door, and returns to the person waiting beyond it. For prayer has fulfilled its purpose when the one who kneels rises more ready to love.